Oh, I tell you.
You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Okay, we're going to get started for the Board of Finance meeting for the town of Branford, August 29th, 2022. First on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the June 27th, 22 meeting.
I read them over, Joe, and I approve.
I'll second it.
I'll make a motion.
Motion's been made by Charlie, seconded by Jeff. Is there discussion, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is citizens' comments. If anyone from the audience would like to make comments with regards to the agenda tonight, you're welcome. With no takers, we'll go to item number 3 to hear a presentation from the Andriel Group in GYL Financial Synergies with regards to performance of the town pension plan for the quarter ended June 30th, 2022, and if necessary, rebalance the portfolio. And in similar fashion, we will look at the other post-employment benefits, trust, and the volunteer fire incentive plan, as well as the coastal resiliency fund. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here again this evening. So I'm Robert DeLuca from the Andriel Group, joined by Michael Laporte from GYL Financial Synergies, and a new associate over at GYL, Matthew, whose last name I cannot pronounce.
Fernandez.
Thank you, I apologize.
Hello, Matthew.
So we're here obviously to report on the performance and the experience of the four funds that Joe mentioned. So as is typical, I'll give a little bit of a backdrop of the environment for the period that we're going to report on, which is the second quarter of 2022, so month ending June 30, 2022, as well as provide some additional detail of what's been going on over the last 2 months since quarter end. As we all know, when we met last, we were going through an extraordinarily difficult market environment with both equity and fixed income markets experiencing negative returns during the second quarter of 2022, and that was in addition to the negative returns in the first quarter of 2022. What that translates to is for the first half of 2022, the equity markets were down approximately 20% through June 30th, and the fixed income markets were down approximately 10% for the same period. So it made for a very difficult investment climate in the first half of the year, and the second quarter being worse than the first quarter. You may recall from our meeting in May, where we were in the environment was quite difficult in demonstrating further challenges. The S&P 500 as our general market gauge made a near-term, we'll call it a bottom for this discussion, on June 16th of 2022 at a decline of about 22% off the market high. Since then, the market has moved slightly higher, year to date, bringing the S&P 500 to negative 15%. Negative returns are always very difficult to address and talk through as to what is causing them and what is the future expectations related to that. So there's a number of things that we are all very well aware of. The events in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine has been a big contributor to the volatility. That's further caused issues with inflation, with energy and raw commodities, especially wheat. We've seen further COVID zero tolerance policy in China that's caused more disruption in supply chain. That is starting to normalize, but there's still a number of issues we're contending with there. So we've seen growth slowing in that part of the globe. So those are a couple of the big issues. And then we have domestically, the inflation that is present and front and center in all of our minds currently. as to the rate of inflation that's been experienced, and that's been reported on by the media. So where they talk about the consumer price index being up almost approximately 9% year over year at last quarter's print, continues to be a very big headwind for the environment. And there were a number of large contributing factors, some of the biggest being wages, energy, and real estate being some of the biggest contributors to the inflation problems that we're contending with. The Federal Reserve has started to address the inflation issues. There's a number of academics that will contend that they should have done it sooner or later or done it differently, but this is what they are doing currently. We saw them make their first interest rate increase in March of this year, followed by an increase in May, June, and July. So they brought the federal funds rate from arguably 0 at the start of the year to a range of 2.25% to 2.5% currently. So it's a significant increase in the overnight lending rate, which is the key tool the Federal Reserve controls. The expectation is based on, especially reinforced by Powell on Friday at the Jackson Hole testimony, is a further increase of the overnight lending rate from this range to a non-specific number, but aggressively they intend to address inflation. What that translates to in the market pricing is the market is pricing an expectation of 3 additional interest rate increases through the rest of this year, September, November, and December, totaling roughly 100 to 150 basis points of further rate increases. Bit of a disparity on that expectation. So whether it's 0.5 or 0.75% in September is to be seen, and it will be very data dependent as to how the inflation numbers for August are and how a few other key data and economic inputs are, especially if we start to see an increase in unemployment. So should we see the year-over-year inflation numbers start to temper and the month-over-month inflation numbers temper and unemployment increase, those are things that will lead the Fed to slow down their rate of interest rate hikes and potentially get to a place of pausing or making a plateau. The duration on that is to be determined. The bond market's clearly showing us that they're expecting the Federal Reserve's policy to have an impact. And what I mean by that is I often talk about the shape of the yield curve. The shape of the yield curve, when you look at the difference of the 2-year Treasury to the 10-year Treasury, has inverted. And what that means is that the 10-year Treasury is yielding less than the 2-year Treasury. That shows us the bond market is expecting economic growth to start to slow down, more than a year from now. So that we'll start to see some risk of a slowing GDP growth rate, not necessarily a contraction, but a slowing. The academics will argue when and if a recession happens, and they'll tell us after the fact. But the bond market is clearly telling us that there's an expectation of a challenging time ahead of how can the Fed navigate these inflation issues and do it in a fashion that they do not disrupt the economic activity significantly. So those are a few of the key cornerstone points. So before I turn it over to Michael to take us through the experience of the fund through last quarter as well as year to date, are there any questions on the broad macro backdrop?
Charlie, got a question?
Rob, are you folks able to project what you think might be the inflation rate by the end of the year?
We can't project that, but what I brought with me, bear with me 1 second, is the consensus estimate from Bloomberg, and I apologize for not having these in order, is that by the end of the year, they're expecting the overall inflation rate to continue to decline and to see it come down to, in 2023, to be about a 3.7% inflation rate in 2023.
So it's now 9, and it's going to come down?
That's the expectation, correct. The Federal Reserve is more concerned about the personal consumption expenditure, the PCE, which is currently running at about 5%, expected to come down to about 3%. So their long-term target is to bring those numbers down to 2%.
Hopefully.
What do you think, Charlie?
I don't know. I think it's going up.
Well, you're saying with the way that the Feds are gonna put pressure on it, they're gonna pressurize it in order to bring inflation down.
Yeah, but how much can they, you know,
Down to 3% is what they're.
yeah.
That, I can only tell you what the consensus forecast is. I'd rather not speculate on what inflation will actually do. But clearly, those that were in the media a year ago saying it was transitory were clearly very wrong. When you looked at under the hood of the inflation elements where wage inflation was one of the big drivers, wage inflation is not transitory. Okay, when you raise wages, you don't decrease them. The only way you decrease your wages is by decreasing your aggregate payroll by laying off staff. So when we have unemployment running at arguably full employment and the labor force participation rate staying fairly stagnant, you know, the wage inflation is set a new level. And hopefully it could stay stable for a period of time and not further escalate. And I'm referring to the broader inflation level, not just the concept of just earnings.
Thanks.
Other questions from the audience? Okay.
Thank you. So if we can turn to the police pension report, which I believe is tab 1 in everyone's book, at the beginning of everyone's book, page 19. We'll start with the 35,000-foot view. And I just want to focus, you know, during a period of time of extreme market volatility, and as Rob alluded to, it's been kind of a unique time in the market because both equities and fixed income have had negative returns. I think it's worth sort of looking at some of the higher level numbers, and really what this Board of Finance has tried to accomplish over the years is having a modicum of risk controls, and you historically have been a little more deliberative and a little more conservative in the way you approach things, and I think the numbers really bear that out. And so I'm focusing on a couple of them. If you look on the top right, in the center column where it says total return 168.89%, and right above that annualized return at 5.27%. And then if we look at the policy, which has been 5.3% and 170% for the total return, you know, doing some rough math, that's less than a 1% relative amount of underperformance. It's about 0.68% on a relative basis, less performance than that of the benchmark. However, if we look at the measures of risk, the beta measure of risk at 92 is about 8% less than that of the benchmark, and another measure of risk, which we don't typically focus on, but I think it's worth noting for purposes of this discussion, the annualized standard deviation, which has been 7.67 versus 8.27, and I did the math out ahead of time, and that's a 7.25% less risk. So what this is saying is essentially you've gotten 99+% of the return of your benchmark, taking between 7 and 8% less risk. I think that's really consistent with the overall objectives of the Board of Finance in tempering some of that risk exposure. That all translates to a positive alpha or value added. You can see in the center of the page on the right, the alpha of 0.03. Alphas are typically a relatively small number, and especially since this is a primarily passive portfolio, we would expect that number to be small, but that does indicate that on a risk-adjusted basis, there has been some excess return. In dollars and cents, we see on the bottom right of the page, beginning value on 4/1 of 8.31 million. As always, ignore contributions and withdrawals. That's not from an investment standpoint. That just that includes when we, or excuse me, it's not from an accounting standpoint. It's from an investment standpoint. So that number is bulked up when we rebalance, etc. And focus in on the net cash flow number. So essentially, inflows have met outflows. There's been about $135,000 in net positive cash flows, and then just under $17.75 million of earnings, bringing us to the value at the end of June of $27,185,000. Since the end of June, we've had about $1.1 million in appreciation net of contributions and withdrawals, about $1.48 million in contributions, $463,000 in withdrawals, and so, as I mentioned, about $1.1 million in appreciation from the market. And our value as of the close on Thursday was $28,304,000. Turning back a couple of pages to page 15, as Rob alluded to, of course, negative returns for year-to-date as well as the trailing 1 year, although there was some downside protection versus the market, both from the excess cash position as well as the increased or higher than benchmark credit quality of the fixed income portfolio. So our return from the quarter was minus 9.58% versus the policy, which was minus 10.2%. Year to date, we're at minus 13.25% versus the policy, which is minus 14%. And then when we get into longer term numbers, of course that's dragged on, and we have to hit the 3-year number before we get to the positive number of 2.89, and 3.6 for the 5-year number, 4.7 for the 10-year number, and as discussed earlier, 5.27 going back to April of 03. Negative numbers across the board. The one part of the portfolio that was positive year to date is the exposure to the oil and gas pipelines, the master limited partnerships. Other than that, there really has been nowhere to hide, with the exception of energy. As mentioned, we've had a little over a $1.1 million appreciation. So using rough math, that's about 4% growth since the end of the quarter. Would you like me to review the rebalancing now? Or
Yeah, any questions on this, on the performance? Charlie?
I'm going to try. Is there any way to figure the average rate of return with all the ins and outs? Like you start at 8 million and we're now at 26?
Yeah, that's the, if you look at the top right, where you see annualized return, 5.27% is the, going back to April 1st of 03, is the average annual return, and the total return, when you combine all those together, is the 168.8.
So the average is, what, 5.27?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So as I was saying, the average was 5.27, your benchmark was 5.3, so you got the vast majority of the return of the benchmark with about 8% less risk.
Okay, so you want to talk about rebalancing recommendation?
Absolutely. So Rob and myself and the finance director spent a fair amount of time over the past week discussing rebalancing, and as Rob alluded to, now is a very challenging time to sort of consider adding money to the markets. But it's also worth noting that it very rarely feels good to add money to the declining market, but that's when money's made in most cases with the benefit of hindsight. And to Rob's point, whether or not we go into a recession, that will only be known after the fact. But we do know that if we go into a recession, it'll probably be a fairly mild one. But if we avoid a recession and stay in a period of growth, it will probably be very modest growth or anemic growth as well. So whether we're on the left or the right side of the kind of the baseline, the playbook is substantially similar, and that is really keeping consistent with the high quality focus, keeping consistent with the long-term strategic asset allocation, which contemplates down markets. We really haven't seen anything in the terms of a down market that hasn't been envisioned by the long-term asset allocation. And so because of that, we do recommend rebalancing the portfolio. However, we also recognize that the Board of Finance has historically been fairly conservative in its approach, and we want to be cognizant of that. And so the solution that we came up with in working with the finance director is we'd like to effect the rebalance, but we'd like to do so over a period of 3 months to try and take some of the timing out of the equation. So if we look at the rebalancing spreadsheet, and if you look at the third column to the right, the first one that's not shaded in a kind of pinkish color. Oh yeah, sure.
Just want an important note that goes with this is while we're talking about rebalancing, really mostly what we're looking at is the deployment of the recent contributions. As the recent contributions came in from the town of Branford into these pension plans and the OPEB during the month of August. So we are looking at how to deploy those dollars towards the policy and doing it deliberately.
So
Thanks, Rob.
just focusing in on the bottom row where we see cash, there's currently $1.764 million in cash, which represents 6.2% of the assets. The policy is to have that at 2.5%. And so consequently, we're recommending reducing the cash position by just over $1,056,000, but doing that over a period of 3 months. And so if you look at the column on the far right, you'll see that $352,000 is just that $1,356,000, or excuse me, that $1,056,000 divided by 3. And so the recommendation is basically to do 1/3 in September, 1/3 in October, 1/3 in November. To and that, as Rob pointed out, will essentially get the annual contribution invested, and you can see how that money would be allocated. About $235,000 of it, the largest single portion, would actually go towards fixed income, and which will, over the longer term, annoy to the benefit of the plan, because of course, although it's painful going through an interest rate increase and seeing fixed income decline, over a longer term, since this pension is an open pension and has a theoretically infinite lifespan, you'll be able to deploy that cash and buy into higher yielding bonds than we've been able to in quite some time.
So, Mike, this is a gradual movement towards the policy.
Correct.
So over a 3-month period.
Correct.
Okay. Questions? Charlie?
Listen, you said we were not in a recession. Well, we've had 2 negative quarters.
We'll let
That's traditional, isn't it?
That's one textbook definition. And then the economists say, but the National Economic Bureau of Research is who will issue the statement that we are in a recession, and that statement is always provided after the fact.
So whether or not we're in a recession is certainly open to some debate and discussion by the popular definition, which is 2 consecutive
Yeah, but
quarters.
it's been traditional for years, and now suddenly it's not.
Well, I mean, that's the traditional popular definition, I'll say. There is an agency, the National Bureau of Economic Research, that makes the official declaration as to whether or not we're in a recession. But I think, in the argument, again, it's one of those things we'll only know after the fact. And the argument against it, of course, is with 3.5% unemployment and such a tight labor market, how much of a recession can we really be in? But I think that's really, in a lot of ways, a question for the academics. But regardless, during this time, we feel it's very important to be disciplined with the long-term approach that served the pension plan well for many, many years. And that's why we're recommending that staged approach.
And that's exactly why we're not recommending deploying the capital in one deployment as well, because of the concern of what data is going to come out, how the Federal Reserve is going to act or react over the next number of days, weeks, months. So we're just trying to remove a little bit of that excess volatility that we think we're to contend with on the immediate term by just being diligent. The amount of dollars being deployed relative to the size of the pension are fairly small. So that's why we thought it would be reasonable to limit the deployment to 3 months as opposed to a longer period.
Thanks, Rob. Other questions? Somebody would like to move
I'll
this
move it,
rebalance? Jeff? Motion made by Jeff. Somebody want to second that?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Charlie. Discussion on the rebalance as provided by the consultants. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. On to the OPEB trust.
Sure. So moving on to the OPEB, I'll cover it relatively quickly in the interest of time, but just, I know you have a very full agenda this evening. But on page 20 of the OPEB report, just looking at the same numbers, a very similar story to that of the pension, and that is we've had returns substantially similar to that of the benchmark. The annualized number has been 4.74% versus the benchmark at 4.81%. So that has come with about 15% less volatility than that of the benchmark. And so that translates to a positive alpha or value added, actually slightly higher than that of the pension of 5 or 0.05. In terms of dollars and cents, the initial value of the OPEB was just over $4 million. We had $24 million in net inflows, much of which is still being held in cash, and then net investment earnings of $6.12 million, bringing us to a value at the end of June of $34,237,000. Since the end of June, we've had about $491,000 of growth, and the value as of Thursday's close was $36,209,000. As far as the investments are concerned, turning back to page 15, also negative returns, however, single-digit negative returns because so much of the OPEB is in cash from the large contribution that we're averaging in over the next, I believe there's 5.5 years left with that project. So the return for the quarter was minus 6.23% versus the benchmark, which was down 6.68. We're minus 7.5 for the trailing 1 year versus the benchmark at minus 7.78. And as mentioned, really about the only place that we've seen positive returns thus far this year is from the oil and gas pipelines. You see that listed as the Ilarian MLP. MLP is short for Master Limited Partnership. One other item of note, and this is sort of gets to the comment I had made earlier, how in the long run, higher yields can actually benefit these pools of assets. With all the cash that we are investing over the next number of years, until recently there really hasn't been any return available for cash. Within the past was about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yes.
We invested approximately $10 million in short-term treasury bills. And so now we're actually getting some yield on that cash, which is
roughly 3%. So on $10 million, 3% is $300,000. So it has an impact. The change in the interest rate environment, while it's negatively impacted prices on bonds, when it comes to where we're looking to deploy capital, has made an opportunity to add some positive return in this point here for the OPEB trust as we gradually feather those dollars and keeping that as cash equivalents in treasury bills to maintain the safety and liquidity.
And those are all mature in less than 1 year, so it doesn't impact our dollar cost averaging over a long period. And as Rob mentioned in his comments, the shorter end of the yield curve is actually yielding more than the 10-year right now. So it's all of this is beneficial to the OPEB. So for the same reasons that we discussed with regards to the pension, although we are deploying dollars systematically in the OPEB from that large pool of cash, there's other cash that has accumulated, and that amounts to a total of approximately $187,000 that we are overweight in cash, and so we would recommend what you see on the far right-hand column. Actually, you know what? I got those numbers wrong, didn't I?
About 883,000 overweight.
Excuse me, 883,000 overweight. I apologize, I read the wrong column. And so that translates to about $294,000 that we would recommend rebalancing. Again, 1/3 this month, 1/3 next month, and 1/3 in November rather. So that'll be about $294,000 per month for each of those 3 months.
Okay, questions on this from Michael on the OPEB trust? Somebody want to move this?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
I'll second.
seconded by Charlie. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, and so moving on to the fire plan. Of course, this was previously commingled with the police pension and was separated into a separate asset pool back in 2015. On page 19 of the volunteer fire report, again, a similar situation, capturing a large portion of the return while doing so with less volatility. The average return going back to 2015 was 4.6% versus the benchmark at 4.8%, and that came with about 8% less volatility, and so that translates to a positive alpha of 0.01. In dollars and cents, we began with just under $56,000. It was $1 million in net contributions and $299,000 in earnings, bringing us to $1,359,000 total. I'll skip the review of the actual investments since this asset allocation mirrors that of the police pension, and then just move on to the rebalancing. And again, we would make the same recommendation to rebalance one-third, one-third, one-third from cash. That's a total amount of $136,000, which would be $45,000 approximately per month for the next 3 months.
Question?
Michael, the money goes to where again? Into what?
It will be split up amongst the asset allocation. So if you look at the right-hand column,
Over here?
you can see
Okay. Yeah, I see.
of that 45,000, about 17,000 would go to bonds,
Yeah,
and
okay.
about 28,000 would go to
Yeah, I got it.
equities.
Yeah.
There were a couple of very small equity trades, so we just zeroed those out. They were, I think, about $1,000 each.
Okay, questions for Michael on this rebalancing for the fire pension? Moved by Jeff again,
I'll second.
seconded by Charlie. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And Jim's coastal resiliency fund is the last one.
So the Coastal Resiliency Fund, and we'll go to page 17. Michael gets on that page there.
So coastal resiliency, of course, being the asset allocation or the broad asset allocation being dictated by state statute, is primarily invested in bonds. The return, of course, since the fund was just started last October, has been negative. The annualized return, minus 7.84. That's actually the raw return too, since it's less than a year. It's not annualized for less than 1 year. The only silver lining there is that it did outperform its benchmark, which was down just over 9%. And again, did so with about 8% less volatility, so there is a positive risk-adjusted return. However, of course, that return in the short history of Jim's Coastal Resiliency Fund has been negative. You can see on the bottom right, $1,925,000 was the initial value. There has been about $1,600 in outflows, basically for expenses, and $150,000 in net negative return, bringing us to $1,772,000 at the end of the first half. Since that time, the value has increased by approximately $26,000, and at Thursday's close, it was at $1,797,000. There's no recommendation to rebalance. It's reasonably close to its underlying benchmark or its underlying asset allocation target.
Okay. Any questions on the coastal resiliency fund? Charlie?
Just a comment, you mentioned like the annualized return, right, it did better than the benchmark. That's like being stabbed only once instead of 3 times.
Exactly, right. It's,
Charlie, that
Yes.
was well put.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those things, there's no way to sugarcoat negative returns,
Yeah,
but there
right.
are, a little bit of a silver lining to that gray cloud.
Or you took a stab at it.
There you go.
So,
Okay.
as well as the Coastal Resiliency Fund, Jim doubles as a stand-up comedian. So,
All right. You're all set? Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
thank you all very much.
Thank-
Take care. Okay, item number 7 is to hear from the tax collector presentation with regards to a proposal on small balance write-offs and policies and procedures that relate to that. Welcome, Bob. Robert.
Good evening, all. Waiting for my partner in crime to get up here.
Careful, you want to move that
So again, good evening, all. I'd like to introduce Bernadette Pellegrino to the board this evening. She is our certified assistant tax collector, so I thought I would get her to one of our meetings so she understands how the process goes,
Welcome.
Welcome, Bernadette.
through the process. So, okay, so before you tonight, we're here to discuss and ask for approval for a small balance write-off tax policy. By the way of background, each municipal tax cycle, the tax office is challenged with a shortfall of payments that come in, so meaning that these are payments that are under $1, a dollar or under, which creates an issue for us for two reasons. One is that it's a public relations issue when we send out a bill for 5 cents to someone. And along with that, it also could create a tax lien on someone's property or someone not being able to register their auto. And the bottom line really is, for chasing 6 cents, it's going to cost us $7.60 or $7.85 per unit. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense to do this. So I've given everyone a write-up and I've put a policy together. I have 5 pages of notes here. I'm sure you don't want to hear that, but if you'd like to, I could certainly go through it. So the bottom line is, for us to collect, we have 342 units right now that date back from 2005 through 2021. And the total amount that we would like to write off is $488. For us to collect this $488 net, the cost would be per unit at that $7.60, about $2,100 for us to do that. So it doesn't make any economic sense for us to do that. So with that, if you want to take a look at the policy, I don't know if anyone's looked at that. Our recommendation is that we do this on a monthly basis once we write off this initial $488. And we do it on a monthly basis, and we bring it to the board once a year, as we do with the suspense accounts. The initial write-off that we're really looking to do is $5 and under. And as you can see, I put in the package for you are all the state statutes relating to waiver of interest. So as you can see, Branford has a statute 220-30, which gives you the ability to waive up to $5 and under. So what we'd like to do, because these have been rolling since 2005 through 2021, is to go up to that $5 mark and write those off. And then again, we will do this on a monthly basis so we don't have this issue coming to the Board of Finance once a year to get the total approved.
So Bob, before 2005, those balances are not on the system?
They are currently on the system. Well, they fell off.
Because
so,
you've written
because
off
of the
suspense.
15-year, right.
But-
Yes.
And, okay, I got it. So this is from 2005 to 2020, or 21, you've got $438?
88.
88.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and the cost of actually trying to administer this is over $2,000.
It's $2,100.
Right. Okay, questions from the board? Charlie?
As you and I talked about this at length, and you answered all my questions. I forgot to ask you, does any other town have such a policy?
Yeah, so actually, the finance director and myself went out and did some due diligence. So we spoke to different towns about how they handle it. So it's about a 50-50, Charlie. Some continue the collection process because it's owed.
Yeah.
And they're not concerned about the cost, so they'll spend $8 for 3 cents. Some just take it and write it off as we're suggesting.
No, I thought we might be unique in developing it.
No, we're not. So, you know, again, what we will continue to do at the window as our taxpayers come in to get stickers for the beach or transfer passes, we'll still try to collect those dollars that are owed. So this will happen at the end of the month, of each month, but really written off as of the 1st. So because of Invoice Cloud and our lockbox, it's a 1-day delay. So we'll take that into consideration. So along the way, we are picking up what I would say nickels and dimes.
Okay, thank you. Questions in regards to this request for write-off? Someone like?
I'll move it.
Move it, moved by Charlie, seconded by Harry. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Great,
All
so
right,
just,
thank you.
just on the policy, there were a couple of things that were omitted. So on 4.2 and 7.121, we just need to add assistant and/or assistant tax collector to that, so we'll make that a change. So
It
it's
says tax collector, you're gonna
Right.
add or assistant,
and/or assistant tax collector.
so Robert or Bernadette.
Right.
Got it. All right, sounds good. I think that's good policy. And you have the next agenda item, number 8, is to consider, and if appropriate, approve a transfer request from the tax collector for fiscal '22 as follows: from tax refunds, $8,403, and consulting, $1,550, for a total of $9,953, transferring into overtime, $8,403, repair and maintenance, $600, miscellaneous expenses, $430, and postage, $520, for a total of $99.53.
So again, as we talked about at the beginning of the tax year, the tax office met with some significant challenges, both on personnel and operational side, so part of this overtime, or all of the overtime, is certainly from that. The repair and maintenance, again, was from a vault that we have. The combination didn't work, so we didn't have any money for the day, so we decided to fix it. So it cost $600, so we didn't have a line item for repairs and maintenance in the tax department. We now have that. We added $300 for this year. We don't see a lot of that happening. We have a couple of adding machines and things of that nature. The overage on the miscellaneous is really for membership, so that's a typo, but the GL number is correct. The 588200 goes to membership. We had 4 individuals that were going for the classes for state certification, so we were over budget on that. Again, we were over on poaches for QDS, as we are certainly utilizing them more than we have in the past to do mailings for us, additional mailings. And that is it.
Okay, questions on this request for transfer?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
A second.
seconded by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you
All
all.
right, thank you, and nice to meet you, Bernadette. Item number 9 is to hear a presentation from the Branford Clean Energy Ad Hoc Committee.
Do we have a handout? Is this it?
Yeah.
Is this it?
Yeah.
Oh,
These two.
these two.
Joe?
Harry, these two.
Did Jamie, you want to quickly say?
Yeah, I'll just kick it off if you don't mind. Thank you. Thank you for placing this on the agenda. So as you may know, back in 2019, the town established a Clean Energy Ad Hoc Committee through the Board of Selectmen. This committee is advisory to the Board of Selectmen. They're created with the mission to explore, initiate, and promote programs and measures that focused on energy efficiencies and reducing greenhouse gases. Since that time, they've undertaken a number of programs that have been highly regarded as successful throughout town. It is also important to mention that the mission that the Clean Energy Ad Hoc Committee follows is closely aligned with our plan of conservation and development. Many things that they work on are actually bulleted throughout that document as well. Knowing that the town invests significant capital dollars in investing in our infrastructure, building and maintaining our buildings, there's an opportunity to further look at ensuring that these buildings are as efficient as possible and meet the goals as I said, defined, not only to meet the mission of the commission, but also as outlined in our plan of conservation development. With that, I will now turn it over to Shirley McCarthy, who's the chair of the committee, and she can make the introductions.
Thanks. Just to give you a little background. Good evening. I'm a retired professor from the Yale School of Medicine, and when I retired several years ago, I mentally frame shifted from medicine to energy issues and began working with the town and had the great pleasure to work with Jamie and Jim. The committee is composed of roughly 12 people. One person who's ex officio is Dinah McCarthy-Berkery, our town's sustainability and compliance manager. She's been a real asset with regard to energy questions. Greg Ames is a well-known architect that was on the National Board of Directors for the American Institute of Architects, served also as the president of the AIA for Connecticut and New England, served on the finance committee of the American Association of Architects. He is also on the Green Building Council, and he's had tremendous experience in municipal buildings and designing them and overseeing them, and which includes town halls, libraries, community and senior centers, firehouses, police departments, and schools, including community colleges. I'm sure many of you know Bob Babcock, who will conclude. He's a very wise, successful businessman that knows how to crystallize the issues. He's been very involved with Branford, having given to education funds and working on the Stony Creek Museum. And so I'll conclude my section with turning it over to Diana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. Good evening to the board. Good evening to Jim, Jamie. It's nice to see everyone today. So we're borrowing these slides from Urban Green, which is an affiliate with the U.S. Green Building Council. Normally it's 200 slides, but Jamie and Jim told me I couldn't do that tonight, so you're just getting a snapshot, the highlights, the fundamentals of building green. But you're all invited to take the full day-long course anytime you want. Anytime you want. Open, good for everybody. Okay, so just going to talk a little bit in detail about what a green building is, right? What a sustainable building is. And this is a course that I get to teach all the time to high school kids, tradesmen, union members, all sorts of folks, all sorts of backgrounds, because it's a growing interest, right? We've heard about it. Branford is the first town with a Coastal Resiliency Fund. They see the benefit of investing in this. Your board sees the benefit of investing in this. And so it's important that we're all on the same page when we talk about it. The first thing I talk about is, what does it mean to be sustainable? And I invite any member of the board to tell me what they feel means to be sustainable to them. Or if not, I can give you my definition. Okay. So the United Nations says, a way of living and working that meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations to meet their needs. That's a little long. My definition is enough for all forever. And you can apply that to anything. Building materials. Think about wood. We use a lot of wood in New England. We want to make sure that there's enough for all forever. So there's sustainable forest initiatives out there, which you go to Home Depot, you go to Lowe's, you pick up wood planks, you're going to build a deck in your house, and it can be certified SFI. That whatever forest Humbert processed that lumber, made sure that they were replanting in a manner that it would replenish the material. So we think about that with energy, with buildings, with water, enough for all forever. And it is really reflective of some of the fiscal policies, as Jim mentioned before. I don't know if you want to mention it now or later, if you'd like. Okay, all right, but very similar to some of your fiscal policies about you want to invest now so that you have a wonderful community to continue to provide wonderful services to future generations in Branford and to make sure that Branford is still existing in its current beauty. So I think it's important to think about that. And I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page here. When we talk about sustainable buildings, it's, there's a variety of terms you can call them. You can call them green buildings, you can call them high performance buildings, you can call them sustainable buildings, whatever you'd like. In the industry, us industry folks, we call that high performance building. It's kind of like you go down the street to buy a new car, and one of the things you look at on the sticker of a car is what is the MPG. You're not trying to buy a car that's going to have a lower MPG than what you have right now, right? Nobody, certainly with the cost of gas, wants to go out there and buy a car that's going to get you less miles per gallon. It's a similar approach with buildings. When we are investing in our buildings, when we're investing in our infrastructure in Branford, we want to make sure that we're planning for the future, that it gets us that much further, right? We're seeing tons of electric vehicles that are out there now, tons of high-performance technology. You switch out an LED, maybe it was an incandescent before. An incandescent has about 6,000 hours worth of light life. An LED has about 20,000 hours worth of light life. It uses way less energy than an incandescent, and it's going to work a lot longer. It's the same thing with our buildings. High-performance buildings have three main components in common. They are more efficient. So they use less energy to give you the same output. They are healthier for the people who work, live, study there, or in the case of the animal shelter, visit there for a little while. They're a healthier environment. And they are more environmentally responsible. So they have less impact on our environment. It's not because they're out there, you know, growing grass on the walls. It's just naturally inherent to how they've built it, right? It has less impact. Where do buildings come into play? Well, buildings use energy. We've grown up in a society where we come home at the end of the day, we drop our bags at the door, we turn on the light switch, we expect our lights will go on, right? We turn on our oven, we want to cook our dinner, we plug in our laptops, we plug in our phone. We use energy. Our buildings consume energy. That's just the reality of it. High-performance buildings use less energy to give you the same output. They give you the same response. And that's important. Our energy doesn't grow from trees, contrary to some belief. Our power comes from the power companies, right? 70% of the power that is generated at a power plant is lost before it even gets to your outlet, before it even gets to your light socket. We lose a lot of energy over the run, the transmission, the distribution lines, and a lot out the power stack too. So when we can offset how much energy we use through efficient technology, like I'll go back to LEDs, that's an easy one to understand. You switch that, for every unit of energy you save in a building, you're offsetting 3 times as much energy that they have to produce in a power plant. So it really does make our grid more reliable. We think about the summertime, everybody comes home, it's really hot, you've had some heat waves later, everybody turns on the air conditioning, hopefully you've got heat pumps, but you turn it on to cool off. If we all pull too much energy off the grid at once, we start to get brownouts. If we pull way too much, we get blackouts, right? We flip the switch, we tripped it. So high performance buildings help hedge against that. They're doing the same service, they're operating the same way, but just using less energy to do so. And the positive environmental benefit is it helps combat what we call climate change or environmental impact. Now there's a lot of misconception about high performance buildings. We are in a beautiful high performance building right now. This is one of the first LEED certified buildings in the town of Branford, Connecticut. Also, it was one of the first in the state of Connecticut. This building costs less money to operate than a conventional fire department would. There's a lot of misconception that you have to put up a lot more money to get these fancy bells and whistles with a high performance building. Most people believe it'll cost anywhere from 15 to 20% more, but the truth of the matter is it doesn't. It really should cost exactly the same or even less, really, with what's out there right now as far as incentives. Because you're going to be buying windows, you're going to be building walls, they're going to have insulation, you need to have a roof, you need to have lights. You're already putting technology out there, and for the most part, new technology for high performance building, it is either standard for code or well within the same cost. So for the most part, you can build a high performance or a sustainable building or a green building at the same rate that you would any other. So what is the benefit, right? If it's not going to cost us much more out of pocket when we build it, the real savings comes during the operational phase, right? So if you're not running a high performance building, you're using older technology, you're basically, this is Jim's favorite slide, flushing money right down right down the drain, flushing money away if you're just building to code. Code, by the way, in the industry we refer to as the worst performing building that you are legally allowed to build when you build to code. So the building will consume energy certainly during the construction phase of it, but majority of the energy that a building consumes is over the lifetime that it exists. And I don't know how you feel about buildings. I prefer our buildings to stay around a lot longer. Hopefully they're not getting torn down every couple of years, but they're going to be out there for a long time. The buildings that exist right now, 90% of that stock is going to be here in 50 years. So we want to make sure that the buildings we're putting up now are using much less energy because they are going to be around for a long time in the future. And so again, we're sort of just hedging against those bets, right? And by doing that, knowing that during the operational phase, your building is going to use the most energy, that is when you can have the greatest amount of savings on your operational cost, right? So you know, okay, you're going to buy a Tesla, and it's going to cost more money, or you're going to buy a hybrid, and it's make us a little more money up front, but you're not going to have to fill up at the gas station as much, right? Or with the Tesla, you don't have to get an oil change anymore, right? So there's going to be additional savings. You're going to be operating that vehicle, you're going to be operating your buildings a lot longer than just that construction, just that initial upfront. This is a fun slide. So when I teach this class, I talk about which sector uses the most energy out of transportation, industry, which is what we consider to be manufacturing, and then buildings are any place that we live, work, or study. Buildings consume the greatest amount of energy out of those three sectors. And just standard across the United States, it's about 40%. As you start to get into more developed communities, it can get higher, 50, 60, 70% of the overall energy consumed within a community is just the buildings. Just the buildings that we live, work, and study in. And out of all of the systems within the building, the one that costs the most to operate is going to be your heating and cooling costs. Now, I heat on oil, which is unfortunate, and I have air conditioning units, right, to run the cooling in my house. So, and we live in New England. It's not perfect San Diego weather 365 days a year. We have to heat, we have to cool. So it is a huge percentage of our load. If you can find a more efficient technology that is going to help save you money like they have done in some of the new building constructions Greg will talk about, that can have extreme financial benefit to you over the lifetime of that building. So the building industry has really started to turn the corner. They've really come a long way when it comes to high performance buildings and what type of buildings they are putting out there. Now we're even starting to see in states, even in Connecticut, we have requirements for all new construction has to hit a certain energy efficiency, conservation, energy conservation standard for anything they build. You're seeing it move along. In California, they've required all new residential and commercial buildings have to be net zero by 2040. And so, oh, perfect, next slide. What is net zero building? So a net zero building, you start with a high performance building, something like what we just talked about, a very energy efficient building. And then you add renewable energy to it so it can power itself all year round. So it produces as much energy as that building consumes throughout the entire year. So it nets out at the end of the year at zero, right? We think about, I don't know, folks have solar on their house, and like I have it on my house. At the end of we'll call it the solar producing year, it's March. That's when I net out from the utility company. So all the solar energy that I'm producing is netted on each of my bills. If I have anything left at the end of the year in March, they send us a check, which they did last year for about $12. So that is a net zero building. And Jamie wanted to make sure that I called that out. So these were some of the strategies that have been important for the town to start considering with regards to sustainability to different projects, and to start applying it to all of the building performance. I'm going to let Greg talk more about the Dan Cosgrove Animal Shelter and how that had a net zero goal. It started with a little bit of planning and design, and then it moved on to building. But the idea is that this is ingrained. This is something that any new project that is coming to the forefront, this should be a consideration. Have we thought about this before you've moved on to the next phase of design, before you've moved on to purchasing the equipment for your school? New air conditioning units, are they going to be high performance for the lifetime of what you expect that equipment to be? There is a cost-benefit analysis, which Jim can talk about after the fact, if you'd like, but it just sort of tells you what the additional, what we call the energy saving measures that made this building high performance. It really was a drop in the bucket compared to what the other costs were. And that savings you're going to see over and over again come back to pay itself off many years into the future. Is there anything else, Jamie, you want me to talk about? Is that good?
No,
Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you, Diana.
Thanks,
Should-
Diana.
If you don't have any questions, we can wait till the end, or,
Yeah, why don't we wait? till the
yeah,
end of the
because he may
presentation?
answer some of
The whole
them.
thing on the table.
Sure.
All right, Greg.
Okay, let's start by saying two things. One, Diana made a point of how long buildings last. The point I'd like to make for you is the buildings that you have now are gonna last a long time. 80% of the buildings we have in 20 years are gonna be the buildings you have now. So it's not just a matter of what do we do with the new buildings, it's a matter of how do we take care of buildings that we already have. And what the committee's been working on is a net zero policy for the town buildings, which provides a program over the next 20 years or so of bringing the whole town to what we call net zero. Actually, the high-performance building Diana talks about today is getting to be pretty much garden variety. What we're into at the forefront of the industry these days is the net zero building. And as Diana mentioned, in California, they're going to be required to do net zero buildings very shortly. We're proposing that we enter a program where we not only build net zero with our new buildings, and I'm talking about the municipal buildings, the town buildings, the school buildings, the public buildings, but where we move the portfolio of buildings we have to net zero. In 2019, we spent almost $1 million for gas, oil, electricity for the town buildings. We add air conditioning the elementary schools in the next couple of years. That's going to go further up. However, there's an alternative. We can convert our buildings, new and existing, to be net zero. And effectively, that brings that $1 million energy cost to essentially zero. Pretty attractive proposition. And that's why we're talking to the finance board, because it makes good economic sense. And it makes good economic sense as an investment. We're going to save money doing it. You should also be aware that while doing it, we're going to improve air quality in our schools. We're going to make our buildings more comfortable, quieter. We're going to have healthier kids with higher test scores. We're going to use 100% clean, renewable energy, no carbon. We're going to have cleaner air in town. We're going to reduce or eliminate fossil fuel emissions from the public buildings, reduce global warming and sea level rise. And guys, I'd like us to set an example for the entire Branford community. I think we can do that. You should know it'll take time. You can't do it all 1 year or next year. You can do a lot right away, but it's a process that's going to take about 20 years because it takes that long to zero out a building. Specifically because changes in the buildings have to be dovetailed with what we call trigger events that occur over the lifetime of the building. There's a tremendous advantage to increasing the insulation and the roof. Big savings from that. And the insulation doesn't cost very much. However, we don't take the roof off to put that insulation on because then you're paying for the roof too. You watch where that building is going, you watch the age of that roof. When the building is ready for a new roof, you add massive amounts of insulation. With that new roof, you pay an incremental cost for that insulation that gives you a tremendous benefit. But you avoid a big investment in a new roof. The same thing would apply with a boiler. You don't throw away a new boiler, but when it's time to replace that boiler, you don't replace it with a fossil fuel fired boiler. You replace it with a heat pump, which is 4 times as efficient. So even though it takes a period of time to do this, I guess I shouldn't say even though, I should say because it takes a period of time to do this, we're advocating we need to start right now. That's why we're here. And I'll contradict myself. We have started. You guys are all aware of the Honeywell energy performance contract. We've reduced the energy consumption in the town buildings, the schools, and the municipal buildings by almost 30%. We've done that to the extent that we've saved in 2019, the $1 million I gave you, that would have been $1,317,000 without that contract. I think that's a pretty damn good start. The example we can point to that's local is our animal shelter. The animal shelter has been expanded to twice the size it was, but it uses less energy than it did before. The energy utilization of that building has dropped by 50%. The energy measures that we put into that building didn't take a ton of money. I think it was like $45,000. We got incentives from Energized Connecticut for about 24, leaving a net cost of about 20. Am I on track, Jim?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Never mind. What it amounts to is the energy improvements, the energy efficiency improvements we made in the course of expanding the building are going to save about $15,000 a year in energy costs over what it would have been if we'd just done that code standard building that Diana referred to. Buying that $15,000 worth of savings every year is costing you debt service of $2,000 a year. So the turnaround is like $12,000 or $13,000 in our pockets every year because of those improvements. And to me, that's the biggest argument there is for net zero buildings. Beyond that, it's all clean electricity. There's no fossil fuel going to be used out there, no carbon emissions. The key to doing this is after you reduce this energy load significantly, you get to the point where it's feasible to provide the necessary energy on site with solar panels, solar electricity, so that over the course of a year, you can end up producing as much electricity as you consume, so that your dependence on that utility electricity with a 70% transmission loss is essentially nil. So that's it. In summary, it's a three-step process. It's a long-term process. We need to get started. But what we do is we continue improving the energy efficiency of each of our buildings at every chance we get. These improvements in energy efficiency are investments that pay for themselves. We take advantage of every opportunity to convert to more efficient, clean electric equipment and systems. Essentially, as I said in the case of the heat pumps, 4 times the efficiency of the conventional heating and cooling systems. We add the solar energy and you're there. It sounds simple, it is simple.
Thank you, Greg.
If you ask me for a precedent, there is none. There is no town that I know of in Connecticut that has established a policy of bringing all its buildings to net zero in the next 20 years. I don't see why we shouldn't be that town. People are building net zero buildings in towns all over the state. I want to make all our buildings net zero. And I think it's easy to do.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Bob?
Yeah, when we started talking about this, we knew that, we can't keep this, genie in the bottle. And we thought it would be a good idea for us to make a presentation to the Board of Finance in that, there are going to be some projects that are going to come up that may require some upfront investment. And for us to have not come to you initially and said, okay, this is our plan, this is what we'd like to do. Now you're aware of what the results can be from this type of thinking. You're more likely to better understand what we're looking for, and unlike poor Bob Imperato with not being a unique plan that he was coming up with, Charlie, I think this is a unique plan for the town of Branford to be able to get into something that we could be a leader in the pack. It's proven to work. We've done it at the animal shelter. The results are very favorable. But we thought it'd be a good idea to come to the finance board and see if you had any questions. And how should we work together to see that we understand each other? Because there are going to be some different ways of looking at a building. And knowing the goal will be very favorable to Branford, why not have this kind of a discussion that, Jim can understand on the town side, Board of Ed side, but at least have this kind of a discussion to say, we can do something, we need your support to understand it, so we thought it'd be a good idea to come to you and let you know who we are, what we're doing, and what our goals are. That pretty much wraps up, what we're talking
Great.
about tonight.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Jim or
well-
Jamie, you have any comments, or should I just let?
I think, Jim, you had something to add?
Just briefly, I think excellent presentation, and I will just underscore a lot of what we do talk about is sustainability in a financial sense. It's the way we did approach our OPEB. We talked about our pensions and our pension funding, and also the coastal resiliency fund. And one of the aspects of that, when this board was approving it, and a point I've made in other discussions and other venues, I think is embodied by this committee. And that was the quote from Arthur Ashe: "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." And I think that's pretty much what these guys are doing. The other aspect of this, which I find philosophically aligned with the Board of Finance policies, is this whole idea of putting money aside or making investments that have a return. Now the return, obviously Greg made the point, there's a return in dollars, but there's also a return in a vast variety of benefits, which I think are generally intrinsic when you read this. And it makes economic sense, which I think is important. It doesn't seem to have the risks that we talked about earlier. It doesn't seem to have geopolitical risks associated with it. It doesn't seem to have risk of what the Fed's going to do, which we talked about the pension plan earlier. So I think that it's something that we need to try to coordinate going forward. The committee's doing a lot of other things which are outlined in their letter. They wanted to focus on buildings tonight because that's where a large energy use is. You may have read, and an article was circulated, I read it this weekend in New Haven Register about indoor air quality and federal dollars and the Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. So there are a lot of funding opportunities. I don't pretend to know all of them. I know that we're financially strong, which is a benefit. I know we make investments for the future, which is philosophically, like I said earlier, aligned with this. So it is a challenge. It's simple, Greg, but it may not be easy. But I mean, there is an aspect to this that I think is it's certainly worth pursuing, and I know the administration thinks so. And you guys are really the first step in this, because nothing really goes anywhere without a recommendation from the Board of Finance, and then later to the RTM, and how we allocate dollars and where we allocate them are things that this board discusses routinely in making decisions among competing interests. So basically, you know who these folks are now. That they would like you, as Bob said eloquently, to take some of this into consideration, that you can use some of this information to factor that into future financing and appropriations. So.
Thank you, Jim. Questions from the board? Charlie?
Just, I'm looking at the animal shelter numbers, and I had some experience with solar panels. I put 200 on my building, and it was about 3 years ago. And we estimated, we knew the cost, but we had help from the state, so that was at a time when you're getting grants. And it cost us about $140,000 to put on a new roof, because it has to be strengthened, and it has to be strong enough to support it. The kilowatt hours were calculated for a payback in 12 years. Never happened. In 3 years, it never happened, because you can't count on the weather. And you got to make sure your solar panels are clean and they're not dingy and you've got to check it all the time. Further, in 3 years, you know, the solar panels have increased in efficiency. So you got to worry about the time when you buy a solar panel today. Is it going to be a lot more efficient 10 years from now? It probably will be, and it'll be half the size. So I'm a little skeptical about the use of solar panels. I don't have any experience with heat pumps, but I do wonder about how long is the payback period on the animal shelter? Do you know?
Didn't you, we haven't looked at it as a payback, we looked at it as a
Well, I
cash
mean, you
flow.
put so much money in, and then you save so much a year, so then over the course of years, it's going to pay for itself.
Well, in this case, it's the example that they've demonstrated here is that it costs $44,000, and they're gonna have a savings of $14,000 a year.
Right.
And so, even though there's some initial upfront costs after the grants, the net cost of the town was $24,000, and you can follow that through. They're saying if everything works the way it's supposed to, in 15 years, they're gonna save close to $200,000. So,
Yeah, you know, if you take the grants away, you're saving 14,000 against 44. You're saying in 4 years it could pay itself off?
Yes.
I think we just said 2 years.
You think
to pay
so?
itself
Yeah,
off. Why
that's-
would you take the grants away? The grants are there, the grants are getting better. I mean, we just got the IRA passed. You can now get a 30% direct pay benefit as a municipality. The same benefit that somebody with a tax credit of 30% gets from their project. I can't answer for the solar that you purchased. I can tell you, my solar hit the prediction exactly.
Mine
I've never
too.
had a problem with
It's also, Joe, if you don't
Jim,
mind,
yeah.
it's just important to note that the analysis that was provided is not, but this is the energy efficiency measures that were put into this building. So this is not solar, this incentives are based on the additional energy in constructing the building. And that's the first part of it, right? Make a building as efficiently, as energy efficient as possible. And I think this analysis is demonstrating that, you know, we've built a building that's double the size than what we had prior, and it's going to use less energy than what was there before. And these incentives are just tied to the measures that we did in actual construction. This doesn't take into consideration. Now, if we were to make this a truly net zero, we would incorporate, which we are pursuing, solar and other measures to produce our own energy to offset the needed energy. So
this is just the high performance.
this is just the high performance.
The high performance
Right.
components that went into the building,
Correct.
not non-solar.
Right.
But I think it's the example of the high performance
Correct.
capabilities. But as Charlie, you know, like anything, it's the buyer beware
Yeah,
to
I
some
know.
extent. And the technology is changing all the
Yeah.
time. So it's hard to keep up with really exactly what the performance is gonna be. But the key is it being recognizing that there are high-performance components that should be considered whenever we have a renovation or improvement to a building, and that's really what they're trying to do, is to educate us as to some of the potential that's out there that
Oh, yeah.
would get them. There's also a reference here, which I think is good for the board at the end. There is the energy plan, the 2020 energy plan, as well as the net zero plan for all town buildings. So maybe that can get sent to the board
Definitely.
for future reference, and that would be helpful.
Yes.
Pam, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious just in terms of process. So you mentioned looking at current buildings and, you know, reinforcing and putting some energy efficiency in place, and then new buildings. Who has oversight over assessing each of our buildings to come back and say, as you replace, you're going to need the roof in 10 years? Do we do that in the town, or does this committee look at all
Yeah.
our?
It's a team
Jamie
effort.
could answer that.
Yeah, I mean, we have, you know, staff, we have a general government buildings, Department Brian Droney, lead trade and oversees building, but we're working in coordination with our sustainable and compliance manager. Actually, even the finance, the Honeywell project was referenced here, and that was done a few years ago. That kind of came out, was a joint effort with the Board of Education and looking at their buildings as well. They really have oversight of their buildings, and they're a huge footprint here in town. So, and obviously, that's something we'd like to have them, ensure that they're incorporating these measures to, and when they come and ask and they want to do a project on their buildings, that they're constructing in the most efficient building possible. So it really is a team effort with various staff members, consultants looking at our buildings.
I have just another comment, because I'm not really there yet. But a residential building, a net zero, then a residential building, no more trees.
You mean to get the solar access?
Well, if you have trees around, you can't get solar access.
It
Well,
depends on
on
the
the-
tree.
And it depends where the trees are.
Be careful where you put your trees.
Yeah, you can have trees on 3 sides and small trees at a distance. I have
Okay.
solar and I have like 20 trees on my property surrounding my house, and I'm selling the solar back to the utilities.
You are. So how much are you generating? Do you know?
I don't remember.
Okay.
And just to be there, there's not a specific ask at this time or a project it's more of a concept that the committee wanted to discuss. So when there is another ask for a project that, the board and then through the RTM as well, when seeking that appropriation, that, we've established a process where have these things been considered? There's an understanding when we use these the terminology high performance, net zero, what does that mean? What is the cost? Has this, what is the process that we went through in determining this project, the scope of the project? So,
Okay, thanks for that clarification,
Thanks.
Jamie. Do we have questions from this presentation, these folks? Good. Any final comments but thank you for your presentation, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, take care.
Charlie, I think it was 40 kilowatts. 40 kilowatts.
Shirley?
40 kilowatts. Okay, item number 10 is to consider and if appropriate approve a request for fiscal '22 from the first selectman as follows. From Fund 700, transfer in 25,000, transferring to EV charging stations / vehicles for 25,000. And in order to fund that, we're looking to take 25,000 out of contingency and transfer it out to the Fund 700. Jim, what's the balance in contingency tonight?
Okay, the balance after all these items is 156,669.
I'm sorry, Jim. Again?
156,669.
And so, again, this is last fiscal year finances. So, Jamie?
Okay, thank you, Joe, and I asked Diana to stay and help present because she could probably answer some specific questions regarding this request. As the board may be aware, we have funded electric start charging stations through the 21 and fiscal 22 budget process. We did not fund it this year. We had some funds in that account. However, there was a change in some incentive programs that we're awaiting to hear about, which we actually are participating. We've submitted some letters of intent for 2 projects. In getting those, the analysis done and what we project to receive in incentives, we realized these are significant incentives. There's also a discussion that there is a lot of interest in these incentives, and perhaps we don't know how long they'll be still available. So we thought to kind of leverage this opportunity, request an additional $25,000 to meet some of our needs or for building out our electric charging stations throughout town. Just to give you an example, we have 3 projects that we have submitted for, one at the animal shelter, one here at the fire department, and one at Foot Park. The project cost for the animal shelter is $21,559. The estimated utility incentive, $16,753. So a net cost of $4,800 to the town. The fire department, total project cost $35,290. The estimated utility incentive, $20,000. Total project cost for Foot Park is $25,395. Estimated utility incentive, $20,000. So a net cost to the town of $5,395. So you can see that these are very attractive incentives. We wanted to leverage this opportunity, therefore, before the board to request this additional funding. We have some other areas in town that would be feasible locations for such charging stations.
So how many cars can get charged at a time?
So these are all dual
charging
dual
stations.
charging, yes, two.
And how long do they just sit there and get charged?
These are level 2 chargers, so it depends on, number one, how big your battery is, what the capacity is, but it can be, you can charge it for 20 minutes, you can charge it for 2 hours.
Okay. Victor?
Are these paid, credit card pay stations, or?
Yeah, we can have them set up to be paid, right?
Yeah, so you can do, pay to charge to your vehicle, pay to power your vehicle. Some of the towns are doing a year or two just to be free to the public, just to understand how much use is getting, how much they're being used. And then they introduce paying afterwards. The only requirement with the Eversource incentive is that they have to be open to the public.
So the intent would be to have them open to the public, put them in areas that are accessible. However, we would have them be, not in a charge. So there would be a charge. Free to the public.
So it could be a profit center?
Yeah, I don't know what the analysis is for profit or how much we would actually generate.
Well, if you're charging for it, right?
I don't think we're looking to be.
You're not looking to make money on it?
They did change the.
I know Charlie was going to ask it, that's why I figured
They used to have it where you couldn't actually make money, but I think now you can actually.
Yeah, depending on the software that you have built into it, depending on, whatever one we want to add. Right now, we have the option to do either pay to power or free to the public. We're choosing free to the public. At any point in time, we can flip the switch and make it pay to power, and then we determine what the rates are. The town of Guilford was interested in going over to pay by customer model, and so they just wanted to recoup whatever the rate was from the utility company for the EV charging rate.
Because they're charging for the electricity.
They
right?
certainly are not giving that away for free.
Right. So we put it in, and then we would have the electric bill for the charging station.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So at least it should cover itself.
Yeah. You wouldn't put a free gas pump there.
Right.
Right. Okay. Questions on this request?
I'll move it.
Moved by Victor.
Second.
Seconded by Jeff. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We're all good? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is number 11, to consider if appropriate approve a transfer request from the Branford Fire Commissioners for the following year-end transfers for fiscal 21-22. And I will read through it. From equipment, 200. From miscellaneous expenses, volunteer expenses, 200. Regular wages and salaries, 127,500. Medic shift, part-time, set 19,700. Overtime public events, 8,100. Vacations, 10,500. Holiday pay, 17,600. Special detail, 1,016. Accrued payroll expense, 4,200. Stipends, 19,300. Professional development, 2,500. Ambulance billing, $14,200. And the equipment, employment testing, $13,000. Purchase services, repair and maintenance, $74.10. Other supplies, $295. Fire prevention, $815. Postage, $500. CMed, $840. Equipment replacement, $432. Volunteer equipment, $8,069. Medical supplies, $7,200. Other fuel, $2,019. Communications, $6,500. Memberships and conferences, $319. And contingency, $40,148, for a total of $312,863. Going into deputy fire marshal stipend, $400, overtime, $245,026, longevity, $295, uniform and clothing, $2,155, safety supplies, $432, furniture and fixture, $59.69. Educational incentive, $2,245, accumulated sick pay, $7,774, hydrants, $8,419, and replacement for sick, $40,148, for a total of $312,863. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for making you read so much tonight. The majority of these are within the payroll replacement accounts. Especially overtime. We carried 4 vacancies throughout the year. Each one of those vacancies needed to be replaced as per the union contract. So the majority of the money is coming from the replacement accounts and, the other payroll accounts such as stipends, holidays, vacation, regular salaries, because we didn't pay regular positions for those. So that's where the majority of our overages come from this year. The other ones, such as replace sick, we had about, we managed very well through the first round of COVID. This year it took out about 22 of us around the holidays. Luckily, by the time the first people were getting better and able to come back to work, the other people were starting to get sick. So that accounted for a lot of the sick time this year. Hydrants, we decided not to budget because we weren't sure what the budget was. I remember, we talked about that in the past we've kind of guesstimated as best we could. This year we chose to wait and see approach. We did get a 6% increase in the second half of the year. So, and then most of the other ones are just small overages for. Mostly related to the personnel outages and recycling of personnel that we had.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Questions on this transfer to clean up prior year line items? Charlie?
Hey, Chief, ambulance billing, is that because the transports are down?
Well, we did exceed our budgeted number for this year. We budgeted, I believe, $1,725,000. We brought in $113,000 more than that, so that's positive news. But the billing number is, I guess, based on the hope that we're going to have more and not be short in that account. That's really a number that's, they take in a percentage of what they bring in. So. We were actually hoping for more this year, but we are getting back to more historical norms now that this whole disruption from the COVID experience is kind of winding down.
Listen, the 4 vacancies that you mentioned, are those still vacant?
We're full right now, Charlie, but we are, they're at the fire academy. They started today. Okay. And they will not be, 3 of them. We did hire a lateral from Allingtown, West Haven, which is great because he didn't cost us anything. He's fully certified, and we're very excited to have him. And then the other 3 started the fire academy. They will be graduating in December, so we will be carrying some of that into December. Okay. But hopefully we'll have a better year with the sick time, and we'll need it.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Questions? Additional questions?
I'll move it.
Moved by Victor. Second by Harry. Is there discussion? Additional questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
We have another transfer for emergency management. Number 12, to consider and if appropriate, approve a request from the emergency management director for the following fiscal 22 transfer from contingency $1,824 into overtime $247 and purchase services, repairs and maintenance $1,577 for a total of $1,824.
So we don't have a budget for overtime in the emergency management account, but that represents, we use the assistant town engineer during one of our emergencies to help us staff the emergency operations center. She brings great value to it, especially when we're talking about down trees and the follow-up for debris management and everything. But we have an MOU with the union that she has to get paid for that work. So that's what that represents. And then the purchase services overage, we identified, again, through experience, that we had some vulnerabilities when it came to our being able to communicate with each other during emergencies and to use the, we use a lot of technology these days. And when we lost the internet, we lost our connectivity to town hall, we lost connectivity to some of the cellular service. We could still have internet here, but we couldn't communicate with each other because we didn't have cloud-based email. So all of the key players now have Microsoft 365. We're able to share files, communicate in various platforms, and we built more redundancy into the internet coverage for the town so that we could maintain that important communication, use that technology to benefit us during these storms. So that's what that number represented.
Questions?
I'll move it.
Moved by Jeff. Second by Pam. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Take care. Number 13 is to consider and if appropriate approve request from the Board of Police Commissioners for the following budget transfer. First one is from regular wages and salaries at $88,471. From parts, 7208. From radio communication, 21,800. Transferring into capital fund, $90,008. Accumulated sick pay, $13,745. Board clerks, $257. Educational incentive, $175. Stipends, $175. Other fuel, $88,808. Communications, $3,864. Memberships and conference, $447 for a total of $117,479. And the second transfer would be from, with regards to the 700 fund, transfer in of $90,008 and increasing the expenditure side, vehicles $40,000, vehicle equipment $42,800. And portable radios, $7,208 to balance out the $90,008. Welcome, Chief. How are you?
Good evening. I'll just go through them pretty quick for you. The vehicles was one that was asked for in the regular budget, wasn't funded. So you have the $40,000 and $21,000 for the upfitting. The accumulated sick time, that's contractual. We had someone retire. They were able to retire out, find additional employment. So we have that expense per the union contract. Boards and clerks, small amount there. I believe that was from an extra meeting that we had held, special meeting. Educational incentive, there's a union member who we identified that was eligible, that was unaware. So they were compensated for that per the union contract. Fuel, self-explanatory. I think we did fairly well, but it's been a tough year for that. Communications, the 3864 with the Walsh building project and the school over there, we identified some radio deficiencies. We have towers throughout town and they transmit our signals, and we had some radio issues. There was some weaknesses and vulnerabilities in that system. We worked with IT and our radio vendor. So now we have fiber runs and a whole lot of technology. things that are above my head, but it was for the hardening of the system and getting better coverage. So there was an increased cost there. We're going to go back to all our other lines. What I mean by that is our cellular account for our modems and a bunch of other stuff to see if we can realize some savings for next year, but we will see a possible increase next year. Membership and conferences, it's just basically we've had the ability to send some of our bosses to some sought-after classes that are run by FBI and PERF, so they have some ongoing membership fees there. That was the overage there. As far as the radios, we do have that account that we do about $91.32 a year for our portable radios. With the supply chain issues and radios, we're having problems getting them. So this is kind of like a preemptive strike of adding 5 to that. The existing number I have in that capital account, that's the difference to 7208. That's a difference. We want to get ahead. We're looking possibly to increase some of our reserve or supernumerary officers. We'll cycle out the older radios to them and give the first line officers newer radios. So just more of a preemptive strike to try to get some more radios before we're even farther back. One other thing, the $21,800 for the radio, that is electronic equipment, specifically multi-band radios for a command post. Since we've last met and after the budget, the 6 towns that we work very well with our SWAT and traffic team and our computer crimes teams, we were able to pool our money together and buy a $500,000 36-foot mobile command center. It was something that we identified as a need. Throughout some of the crises we've had in New Haven County, that's always been an issue. And there is one that's kind of available, but it's outdated, doesn't have the technology. So we were able to pull it off. Every municipality contributed anywhere from $100,000 to $130,000. I took $100,000 out of our asset forfeiture account and contributed it to that. Further discussions in the calculations of the payments and the contributions, the radios were identified as a need. And at that point, I assume that because of the budgetary process and to transfer that money. So those radios will be part of our regional vehicle. It was something that we had on the radar that we would want for here in Branford. I don't know if I brought that up, but it just isn't really fiscally sound to do it ourselves. It's not used all the time. It would be used better among all the towns. So that's basically it.
Where's that vehicle housed?
Right now it's in Wisconsin. It's just being finished up. We were able to grab one of the last ones. That was another thing with the urgency of the project. If we didn't strike fast, then we were looking at about a 2-year wait.
What's PD stand for?
PD?
Yeah.
Police Department?
Okay, all right. So
yeah.
It's what is it, 36? Could you describe the vehicle again?
So it's basically like an RV that's converted for police use. It has
mobile command center.
Yeah, it has technology, cameras, redundant systems, whiteboards, TVs. So what it's used for is basically containing the bosses, getting, when you're at a major scene or, unfortunately, all of us deal with crime scenes, or sometimes they don't happen at the perfect times and it's, 100 degrees or it's 0 degrees. It also gives us some shelter and a little bit planning stages. It has the capacity to hold in one of the conference areas, I believe 6 to 7 people in just that one area, then 4 or 5 in the back, and then those standing. So it's just basically a big RV.
Okay. Questions?
Chief, I thought we had a contract for fuel. Do we?
We do with East, I believe it's East River.
Yeah, but so there's a need for more?
Our usage didn't change. The price per gallon changed.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's tied to the market.
Okay.
Index.
Victor, you have a question?
Where will that vehicle be housed?
At this point, it looks like it'll be at East Haven PD. If that doesn't work out, which it should. We have room in ours. We'll lose some space in our garage. But our regional traffic vehicles there, our regional Bearcat and SWAT trucks in North Haven, so more likely it looks at this point it's going to settle down at East Haven.
Thank you.
So if there was an emergency in Branford, we'd have to deploy people to get it, to bring it here, or are they part of the plan that you all work together? And
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically that vehicle, in the initial stages of the emergency, it's really not necessary. So as the crisis or the need is evolving, we would call. All we have to do is pick up the phone, we call them, and we're going to have officers for all 6 towns that are familiar with it, because there's some leveling hydraulics. It's all computers now, but they need to know. And we want that group of officers to show up and have everything set up for us. So all the technology will leverage some of the strengths of our IT department, but also we will just call. And that's how it works now. We have the traffic van. If we need that, we just call, we deliver it, vice versa. So I can't tell you over the past probably 6 years how good it's been, the cooperation. Whatever we need, we just call, and vice versa.
Okay, other questions?
A question on vehicle.
Barry.
You were budgeting this year for an EV vehicle. Did you order it? What's the status?
We ordered it last year,
Right.
but they can't find it. They don't know where it is in production. There was talks that they might halt production. So we're working with the dealer to identify the VIN number to try to find it where it is in production, and we're still waiting for that. But I got a feeling that's going to be, like everything else, police vehicles aren't immune from what's going on. Right now, the cars we ordered last year, we have 2 of them. The other one's outstanding. We put in the other order, and we're working with our vendors. So police cars, again, we're over a year behind. And it's not getting any better. It's to the point where we took one of our administrative vehicles, we just took it out to have it upfitted for patrol use, because it has the heavier suspension and better transmission. It's more built for that, for patrol work. And then we got just a regular vehicle to give on the admin side, because we're struggling. We might be lucky that our dealer that we utilize bought, I think, 100 vehicles. Don't meet all the specs that we would prefer, but we may be forced just to order those. It's not good when you call the dealer and he laughs at you when you ask him, do you have any cars?
Jeez.
Yeah. And then the parts inside the cars are behind, and the labor costs, we're looking at least $1,500 in labor cost increase for those.
So you would either set up a separate charging station or come down to the fire department to charge that vehicle.
He's got one.
They have one.
Yeah, he's got one.
He's got one. He's already ahead of you.
We have one for the social worker. She really likes it, but it was $40,000, so it was a little pricey, but
Not cheap.
not cheap. But she loves it.
Jeff, you had a question?
No, I just want to confirm what the chief is saying. We've lost vehicles too on our side. They can't identify, they fall off the grid, then they show up, and you can't track them. So it's
Hopefully it'll show up.
It's reality, yeah.
It's a supply problem, parts.
It is. So we're looking at. So what we're going to see is the fleet mileage is going to jump substantially, because we're running the same cars, and then hopefully, we can bridge that gap. But it's unfortunate. We're in good shape compared to others. There's others that are in tough shape.
Okay, questions? Other questions from the chief on this? There's two transactions. Somebody want to move these?
I'll move them, Joe.
I'll second.
Moved by Jeff, seconded by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, chief. Good luck.
Thank you for your time.
Take care. Number 14 is to consider and if appropriate approve a transfer request from the Register of Voters for the transfer fiscal 22. And it is from election workers 4,300 into deputy registrars, $3,107, seasonal part-time, $318, and other supplies, $875, for a total of $4,300. Welcome, Darren and Daniel. How are you?
Good evening.
Good evening, folks. Fairly self-explanatory. Would you like to expand at all on this request?
I'd like to start with the, we requested to move from advertising $874.75 to cover other supplies. In hindsight, it probably should have come out of advertising to begin with, because we had to do mailings to the 3rd, 5th, and 7th district. Because we had to, during COVID, we had to move around some of the polling locations. The other seasonal and part-time help was over due to the crossover of hiring new clerks in the office for a month. And then after we do our annual canvas in town, starting in, that goes usually January through March. Starting in April, our deputies started working on the primary that we had 3 weeks ago. And they also assisted in helping the training of the new clerks as well, in covering vacations and sick time.
Okay. So the agenda is the one that we're transferring from versus the letter, which has a different, that has some money coming out of advertising?
You have the letter, Joe.
Yeah, the letter is from election workers, $3,425, and transferring into the part-time help of the numbers are actually a little different.
I think the letter does not include the other supplies, $875. That was added after the fact.
Yeah. So the $875 I see, they have $318 going into part-time, and they have, yeah, it's just, so I think you've just combined it, but you didn't take it out of advertising, you took it all out of election workers. That's really the difference. If that works, it works.
But realistically, like I said, the other supplies, the $875, probably should have come out of advertising.
Okay,
that was probably
that was your request.
Yeah.
But do you have money in, and if it doesn't matter, we go with the agenda item. So if you have 4,300 in left over in election workers, we'll just let it rest.
Okay.
But I just want to check with Catherine on it.
Yes.
You're good? Okay.
Yep.
So the transfer in that you're asking for, we're going to accommodate.
Okay.
We're just not going to take it out of advertising. Okay. All right. Questions from the board? Moved by Victor. Seconded by Harry. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
folks.
gentlemen and ma'am.
Okay, next is consider if appropriate approve a transfer from Public Works for fiscal '22 from road materials $6,865, streetlights $41,932 for a total of $48,747. Going into road painting and signs $6,865, utilities $5,190, and other fuel $36,742. Welcome, Gary.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, so the shortfall in the road painting and signs is one, a decision to switch over to epoxy paint instead of the latex acrylic. It's more expensive, but it lasts 7 to 10 years instead of 1 to 2, and then we'd be refreshing it, every couple of years. Also, kind of implementing some traffic calming measures, extra fog lines to kind of make the travel lanes appear narrower on these heavily traveled, higher speed roads, try to slow people down. So that's really where we
that's where the shortfall was, and the reason why we took, taking that money from road materials and put it into road painting signs.
Okay.
Okay, and then as far as taking money from streetlights and putting into utilities and other fuels, you know, that's due to economic costs, the rising economic costs.
Okay, got it. Questions from Gary? Charlie?
Gary, why was there so much money in the streetlights, 42,000? I mean, what was it there for?
We have the same, basically we go on the same.
I think we, in this fiscal year, we realized they, Eversource revamped a number of them, went to the LED lighting, so that has a reduced rate. So I think this budget was set, and that's why we saw a reduction, due to the relamping.
Thanks, James.
So we went green.
Yeah.
Yeah, green.
Sale pays.
Okay, questions from Gary on this transfer?
I'll move, Joe.
Moved by Jeff.
Second.
Second by Pam. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, next is to consider and if appropriate approve request from the town planner for fiscal '22 from seasonal part-time $3,114, transferring into overtime $1,674, into advertising $1,440 for a total of $3,114. Welcome, Harry.
Good evening. So there's two things at work here. One is a change that was determined by the Human Resources Department and how our board clerk for Planning and Zoning Commission is paid. Up until this past year, it's been on a stipend, so it's one flat fee. It was 80, it just creeps up every year to a little 2% increase, but it's been a flat fee for every meeting, whether it's 15 minutes, an hour, or 4 hours long. So HR has determined and now put in place a practice where it's paid as overtime, both the attendance at the meeting and time to do the minutes themselves. So that's resulted in an increase over the last year in getting that activity done and paid for. The other thing at work here in terms of the advertising overage is the number of applications that the Planning and Zoning Commission had. It was a much higher number than we expected, and that resulted in a need to advertise a public hearing. It's in the paper, and despite several pushes through the legislature, several people trying to change that have been unsuccessful, so that's a requirement in state law.
Okay. Questions on this transfer?
Move it.
Moved by Jeff.
Second.
Seconded by Harry. Is there questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Harry. The next request is to consider and if appropriate approve a transfer request from Zoning Board of Appeals for fiscal '22 as follows. From office supplies, $400. From travel, $155. From memberships, $200. For a total of $755. Into advertising for the same amount, $755.
I'm sort of covering this for Jim Setti to save him coming to a meeting tonight, so since I'm going to be here anyway. Similarly to the Planning and Zoning Commission, the ZBA had an unusually high number of applications, so for the exact same reason, we had overage in the advertising account, which is responsible for the public hearing legal ads.
Gotcha. Okay, questions on this?
Move it.
Moved by Charlie.
Second.
Seconded by Pam. Is there a discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Harry. Next is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from lead tradesman for the following fiscal '22 for general government buildings, GGB, from regular salaries and wages, $41,026, accrued payroll, $170, uniform and clothing, $28.53, purchase services, repair and maintenance, $41,026, office supplies, $800, other supplies, $21.41, meals, $490, equipment, $733, furniture and fixture, $250, Memberships at conference, 1,200 for a total of 90,689. Transferring into overtime, 2,139. Utilities, 81,302. And fuel oil, 7,248 for a total of 90,689. Welcome, Brian.
Welcome. Good evening. As you can see, basically the request is to cover the overrun of the utilities, water, electricity, gas, and fuel oil due to the rising costs with the utility suppliers.
So it's that simple, just the cost of the fuel and everything. Okay. Same basic volume, but just higher prices?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question from the board?
R&M costs are not being used.
No, it was being used. There was some left over there, yes.
It's unusual that it matches the regular wages. Exact number.
I think that's Catherine's creativity, maybe. So that's a good number. Other questions? I'll move by Victor.
Second.
Second by Charlie. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, next is to consider and if appropriate, a request from the building department for the following transfer from contingency 4,484 to stipends for the same amount, 4,484, and from contingency again the same amount. Oh, I'm seeing. One is for fiscal 22,
Yeah.
4,484. The same request for fiscal 23, 4,484 from contingency into stipends, and then back to fiscal 22 from other supplies, 500 from travel, 400 into online services, 900. Jim, you going to cover this?
Sure. And I'm glad you pointed out that it's 2 fiscal years for really the same issue as it relates to the stipends. And that was going back to the governor's executive order in which they allowed for restaurants, et cetera, to basically set up outside. And a lot of towns, their zoning regs didn't allow that, so the executive order superseded that. And in doing so, then the building department, building inspector received a stipend for basically the extra time being spent to administer that. And so that's reflected in the old year and in the new year. And the other thing is, initially it was being charged to the salary account. We didn't want to charge the salaries because it's a stipend. It's not necessarily part of the base salary. So it wouldn't reconcile to the detail, say in the back of your budget book in future years that was to continue. And then the other is related to some of their online work with their software system and fees. That's probably something we got to revisit in the current year. But for this purpose, we wanted to address primarily the old year and the stipend issue in both years.
So when they did the outside dining, did they require building permits for those?
Well, they required basically had to be inspected, et cetera. So
They had to come in, we had submitted an application along with some details of what they're presenting, and it had to be inspected, as Jim had mentioned. The executive order, or the statute, runs until spring of 2023. It was extended. It was set to expire this past spring. However, they had extended it after the budget was developed. So our zoning department our zoning commission is considering some zone changes to allow that to continue. And at that time, then this position or this responsibility will no longer fall on the building official.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Questions on these transfers? Move it. Been moved by Victor. Second by Pam. Go first. Additional discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, and Jamie for the clarification on that. Item number 20 is to consider and, if appropriate, approve request from the town clerk for the following budget transfer for fiscal '22 from computer indexing, $128, from advertising, $443, office supplies, $23, vital statistics, $212, for a total of $806, and transferring that to professional development for the same amount, $806. Lisa?
Thank you. I had attended the International Conference of Municipal Clerks back in May in Little Rock, Arkansas, and although we typically don't travel that far, I applied for a grant, and I was granted the grant. And so I just came a little bit short in the professional development to cover the additional education sessions that were offered in Little Rock. Kind of a recap of what you may not be aware of is I attended 4 conferences over the year that consisted of over 15 educational sessions and also an additional 6 online classes. So the world of town clerking is always about continuing education and keeping abreast of any of the updates on election statutes, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope you approve it.
Okay, and you said here, as an aside, I had the honor of carrying the Connecticut flag in procession of state and international flags during the opening ceremonies for 645 municipal clerks. That must have been an honor.
Yes, it was an honor.
Yeah.
I was the only attendee from Connecticut. Typically the state presidents will carry the flag, but she wasn't able to make it, so I was lucky enough to do that.
Okay, nice. Questions from Lisa?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
Second.
second by Harry. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Lisa.
And can I also report good news on my revenue budget?
Sure.
Did I just hear a groan? So my budget was $826,000. That's combined real estate conveyance, town clerk, other monies, and e-commerce revenue from the online portal. So the budget was $826,000 combined, and that that budget was exceeded by $312,300 net.
Okay, so that'll help fund balance. Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to number 21.
Okay, thank you.
Which is a request from the Finance Department for a bunch of transfers, and I'll read them quickly. Probate court, for the probate court. From communications to 05 into property, auto, and general in GL, $205. Board of Finance moving $1,435 out of audit and into advertising, printing, and binding for the same amount, $1,435. For municipal insurance, from insurance damage, $14,202, into property insurance, $14,202. And the other one is with regards to special detail, to consider if appropriate approve a resolution increasing the fiscal '22 budget to cover police special detail costs offset through higher than budgeted revenues. And there are that resolution, we'll call this Part B of 21, is resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriation for fiscal '22 general fund budget from $120,965,315 to $121,239,315. This increase will be funded through increases in estimated revenue resulting from special detail receipts. And The increase will be for special detail, an increase in the revenue side. I'm sorry, special detail will be $274,000 on the revenue as well as the expenditure side. As far as the expenses from legal, for claims and legal fees, there'll be a transfer of, from contingency, $44,000, tax appeals, $37,000, for a total of $81,000, transferring into legal of $23,000, and expenses and claims of $58,000, for a total of $81,000. So why don't we take the first three, Jim, first, the probate court, Board of Finance, and municipal insurance. Keep that simple.
Sure. Okay, well, the first one is the property, auto, and liability line. You know, probate has their own liability insurance, which they carried for a while. The renewal came in higher than what was budgeted by $205, and that's something you'll see later on the second page as it relates to the town's insurance as well. Board of Finance, essentially, we're taking some dollars that were left from the audit line and using that to cover, you know, printing of the notices, and also, you know, the printing of the budget books. The insurance damage, you know, our insurance costs have gone up year over year. If you compare this to 21 to 22, we spent $108,000 more in expenditures. I mean, the budget reflected, accounted for all but about $14,000 of that. The increase is in obviously a variety of areas. One notable increase on a sort of a percentage basis, although it's not a huge dollar increase, is the prior year, like cyber insurance cost $5,000 in 21, and 22 it cost $15,000. But obviously there were increases all across the board, but not as proportional as that. And as you know, we have a lot of insured risks, anything from small things like fidelity bonds for myself, law enforcement liability, automobile, general liability, pollution, property casualty, public officials, et cetera. So, and that was close. It was about $14,000 off on an account that's you know, was over $1 million of budget. So I'll stop there, and then we'll do a special detail after the vote.
Sure. Questions on these, the probate, Board of Finance, or municipal insurance?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
Second.
second by Pam. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next one is the special detail, the $274,000. That's fairly self-explanatory. Jim, any other comments on that?
Nope.
I'll move it, Joe.
That's been moved. Again, it increases the revenue side, and the expenditure side, it's a wash.
Yeah, I'll second.
So motion made by Jeff, seconded by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And third is the legal piece of it. There's a $81,000 increase request for those two line items. Jim?
Sure. I'll focus on the two areas. The expenses for legal, while it requires you know, $23,000, you know, one of the sort of the nagging drivers of that expense is Crescent Bluff litigation, which was about $58,000. Absent that, it would have been a good year on the budget, but I think in retrospect, if you look at the legal fees over the years, you know, that line item is lower than it's been the last 4 years. So a little bit of a positive note there. On the expenses and claims, you know, there's a lot of costs associated with the tax appeals, you know, appraisals, et cetera. But there was the shoreline shellfish litigation was settled out for $50,000, and that was a big factor in that one. Overall, you know, sort of the general, you know, contracts, risk management, other things was you know, about $203,000. So you know, then you have your special matters, you know, the shellfish, you know, Parkside, and you know, a variety of other smaller things. But again, overall, I mean, if you look at it comparatively, it's a smaller transfer than we've done in other years. And again, I think the The two outliers are the Shellfish Partnership litigation and the Crescent Bluff legal fees, which is still going on, I guess.
So those are ongoing claims?
The Shellfish is done, so that's all set. Crescent Bluff on.
Yeah, Crescent Bluff continued. We have a settlement. We are just waiting for it to be enacted by all parties. So that continues to slowly go through the court system. But this body, the town, approved a settlement over a year ago, and but through various appeals and motions by different parties, it's continued throughout this year and still remains
Thanks,
waiting to
Jamie.
be settled.
Questions on this 81,000? So you want to move it?
Move it.
Moved by Charlie,
I'll second it.
second by Victor. For discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is to, item number 22 is to discuss a philosophy and framework for allocating future ARPA funds. And Jim is, as you know, sent us some information back in February of 22 with the way the town had received an allocation of $8,257,000, and we received approximately half of it, and we had taken the approach of going with a standard allowance. If you folks have refreshed and read that letter that was sent out, and then now it's coming to a point of looking to see how it's allocated, and so Jim has put together some concepts that the board can consider down the road with regards to allocating the expenditure of these funds, which do have some timeframes involved with it. And Jim, you want to expand on this a little bit?
Sure. And as you know, in the last year's budget, we used about a third of our ARPA dollars for a variety of items which you approved. And back in a few months back, we heard a presentation from the Shoreline Chamber and the Branford Arts Alliance outlining some of their needs. And I think, you know, based on what I observed and some of the questions, you know, there was no action taken, and I think some of the thinking and some of the conversations that I've had with some of you individually was, well, maybe we should think about developing a framework for this. And so I thought, well, maybe the framework should kind of align with the way we actually chose our election. And so, you know, when you look at the various things, you could focus on public health, negative economic impacts, investments in water and sewer, investments in broadband, and revenue loss. And we chose revenue loss because we received less than $10 million. And, you know, I think the philosophy of the Treasury was that, you know, because communities would be losing revenue because of the pandemic, that they would basically cut back in services, and this would be a chance for them to replenish that. Easy to say in hindsight now that, you know, in Branford's case, that wasn't the case. I mean, Lisa pointed out some of her revenues. Ambulance revenues this past year were good. They were down the year before. And so for Branford, you know, as a community that's heavily reliant on a property tax, that didn't materialize. However, that thinking did not escape the Board of Finance, myself, and the first selectman, because as you may recall, we budgeted 95% collection rate that year, and we thought, well, it seemed feasible that 5% of the people wouldn't be able to pay based on pandemic-induced hardship. So we also were thinking about revenue loss, and so that kind of aligns with what the Treasury was thinking, in my opinion. And when you look at the uses of revenue loss, so I said there's those 5 other uses. You get off the revenue loss exit, and what do you find? You find that a lot of those items that are described are strikingly similar to what is in our general fund budget. So the thinking is, well, that seems to align. You know, they're saying, okay, well, if your community suffered revenue loss, and some communities, now remember, this is national, so some communities may not have had conventions, they may not have gotten parking revenues, parking garages, et cetera, hotel taxes, for example. So this is a national program, and so in many cases that was probably appropriate. And so when you look at that and you try to line it up with our general fund budget, the thinking is, well, that's probably where we should be spending most of our money based on our election. And if you were to do that, it would pretty much define how you want to use your money. Now, I think you can make the case, and I'm not siding with the requests that were made, even if ARPA didn't exist, you know, supporting a chamber program or supporting the arts in your downtown could easily be an economic development thing. And the reason I say that is, let's say ARPA didn't exist, as I said earlier, and let's say the Economic Development Commission came to the town and says, hey, we'd like you to consider funding these two items in the budget. One is the arts, and secondly is the chamber program to help businesses. That would be part of our normal government services through economic development, which is, we have an economic development budget, we have a part-time economic development folks, and we have economic development expenses in that budget. So that lines up with the general government services. But, you know, I'm not naive to the fact that, you know, there may be other demands out there that perhaps aren't being communicated or articulated. I know there was a community survey that was done recently. I mean, I'm not in the social service background, so me reading it was kind of hard to discern any meaningful path to take from there. But I recognize that over the course of the time that these funds are available, that at some point you may get other requests. And the challenge is, well, how do you kind of approach that? And I think one way to kind of approach it, which is similar to, as Joe's familiar with, the state of Connecticut Department of Revenue Services through their Neighborhood Assistance Program, is you set a cap. So you set a cap as a percentage of how much you want to put in play for this need. You know, it's almost like your contingency in a way. And, you know, it may seem arbitrary, but I was saying, okay, well, what if you chose 95%? And, you know, that would basically, you know, so now you say 95% is going to be what it's intended to do, philosophically aligned with the Treasury guidelines, pursuant to the standard revenue allowance. And the other 5% is for, is sharing that windfall, for lack of a better word, with the community for needs that may come your way over the period in which these funds are available. So that was one way to kind of set rules or set guidelines that may assist the board. It's certainly not the only way, but it was, you know, so I was putting in my own, I guess, kind of 2 cents, as bad as trite as that may sound. But it seemed like it might be an approach that the board may want to adopt or not. And it's really, you know, I had the discussion with the chairman and the first selectman, and the joint decision was to present this to the board, kind of get your thoughts again, because you're the first appropriating body. You may recall that we said that we would follow our budget process when it came to allocating ARPA dollars. So that means we're making appropriations during the budget process, and we're making appropriations during the year. And the appropriations we make during the year, in Branford, we've decided that we want to follow an established process. So it would seem to be logical that in establishing this framework that we start with the Board of Finance.
Thanks, Jim. So the thought is that there's no decision necessarily tonight, but that we could, again, may not have had time to look at this, but maybe look at this again. The 5% essentially might be a number that gets then allocated to other non-governmental areas, but they think that's really, and conceivably the 2 requests that came before us, they could either be considered within that 95%, as Jim mentioned, as really a governmental piece, or could be also outside of that into that 5% allocation. So essentially the 5% would be initially of that half of that allocation we have, which was about $4 million.
Well, I think I was thinking 5% of the total allocation.
Which is the 8 million. So it's about 400 and some $1,000 that you'd be looking at over the next, in the time frame in order to allocate this is to what year?
Yeah, I believe it's 2024.
December 31st, 2024.
2024.
We allocated
And then spent by 26.
2026.
Yeah.
So this,
And so, again, this is kind of like, I know we're kind of taking baby steps here to some extent, but other towns have kind of run the gamut as to how they've used some of these monies. We're trying to say that it may be something, again, if you look at the neighborhood assistance to some extent, let's say we set aside the 5%, and whether or not the town administers it or it gets administered through some other clearing type of house, let's say it could be a community foundation, for instance, that then the cap would be eligible, or that amount would be eligible for others to put grant requests into. But again, we're talking about a framework that's not fully developed, but what Jim had put forward is kind of a philosophical approach to it to start off, so that we could consider that going down over the next meeting or the meeting after that. Jamie, anything else?
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just really to put some, understanding of what we are. I think the bulk of it, I agree, the majority of it should go to general government services. We from very beginning, we say we're gonna try to, stay within the intent of the Treasury's guidance. But to have some that, some dollars that we feel can be distributed to the community organizations that were truly impacted by the pandemic, either through lost revenue. I know a number of organizations may have, had to cancel fundraising events and that such things that typically support their mission. And other community organizations may have actually seen as a result of the pandemic, a need to provide additional or increased level of services. So if we have an opportunity where some dollars can be distributed to those organizations, within an application period, by, as stated, it has to be distributed by the 24th or encumbered by the 24th, December 24th.
So again, I think, I'll work with Jamie and Jim to maybe put a framework together a little more solid, but at least the philosophical approach to it. If you folks have comments or inputs, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Well, I've just joined the Community Foundation Board, and so I'm hearing it from their side as well, and I like the fact that they have a framework established where people apply and how they do it, so they go through an established process already to get those funds, so versus, I think we saw, I'm sorry, I can't recall his name, from Baca, come and wasn't necessarily, didn't know, it was kind of all over the place how people applied. So it just, to me, those, and they're now doing, the Community Foundation is doing a survey, so they know where those funds are really going to be needed. I don't know, versus us trying to
allocate it.
Allocate it.
Yeah, so I think you're right, Pam. It's that gives us an opportunity. I think that gives us a framework and a possible discipline that again, philosophically may tie to this. So I think that could possibly work.
Yeah, like for example, we wouldn't necessarily want to be doing what the Community Foundation does, right? But one way, this is speaking hypothetically, one way you solve that is say, okay, well, how much do we want to sort of, like Joe said, 95% for our stuff, and then let's put 5% out there for the unarticulated needs, which a group like that, or others, is more in touch with. And so for us, that works for us because we said, okay, this is how much we're going to allocate to that, and then those decisions get made, and then maybe there is some loop that comes back to the town to kind of bless that. And that's what they do. I mean, so that could be an approach, and then we're just kind of deciding the size of their bag. You've always well, other board members has heard us talk about sometimes when it comes to our debt plan, it's like, well, we'll define the size of the bag and then figure out what goes in it. Well, here is kind of defining the size of the bag too. And, you know, we got a 95% bag and we got a 5% bag. A 5% bag, okay, here you go. So, and then we're sort of, you know,
Right.
out of it. And then we focus on our general government services.
And would the state say that that money was given out by and spent by? In other words, if this money gets allocated to the, let's just say, the Branford Community Foundation, is that considered spent, or is it just delivered?
I was thinking the same thing, is when is it considered spent? Is it considered spent once the recipient disperses it, or is the sub-recipient disperses it? So I would have to get some more clarification on that.
You would think it's when it's ultimately, you know, purposefully spent, but that we can get clarification. And we'd want to make sure that the board was, and obviously the RTM, if it's a transfer out, if we're following that process with, you know, that the guidelines are somewhat acceptable as well.
Right, and I would imagine they could even present, you know, ultimately how that money is being spent in the community.
Yeah,
yeah. But then I think to extend your analogy, you'd have to have some sort of MOA, most likely, with whoever that organization is.
As a grantee.
Yeah.
And then knowing that it's a pass-through.
Yeah.
So we can do, so I think there's some work to be done there, but I think conceptually, there's some merit to it, so. Harry?
A few words. I think, in my opinion, the grant should go out directly from us. Setting up the structure of their eligibility isn't that difficult. But, you know, to now enter in with a third party, which is the Branford Community Foundation and other, I don't see it that way.
That's okay. I think, you know,
Yeah,
tonight is really.
Yeah, we're brainstorming.
We're brainstorming, again, we're talking it through, so there's no decisions that have been made. I think, I want to thank Jim for putting together the concepts. I think
Jim wants to be responsible as director of
Jim's
grants and
Jim, I think, likes the 95 approach, but that's okay. We're okay. We're okay for tonight. So.
I think he stole that 95 approach under the IRS private foundations that have to give out 5%.
It would actually be, you know, it's funny now that you say that, but actually it was by chance, actually, because I was at one time it was 90, I think. So it's
yeah.
Then I started playing with the numbers. It's like I think 95 probably would.
Well, again, you know, when we first talked about it, I mean, it basically is going to be a one-time grant. So where the benefit would be, like with the Community Foundation, is the ongoing oversight and whatever, but we have.
They're all different kinds.
Pardon?
But they don't always have to be in perpetuity.
Yeah,
They can be a one-time grant.
One for the other.
Perpetuity, thank you.
But
well, it demonstrates the sort of discussion that people have a lot of ideas about it, right?
Well, it's 5 after 10.
So we will,
the chairman said
we will continue
9:45.
Yeah, I was close, but
You were.
That's okay.
That's all right.
So, and we still have another item to
we
consider.
thought of it.
So we'll prolong this. So again, if it's okay with the members, I'll move on to the next agenda item. But we will circle back and discuss this further. But thank you on that. Number 23 is to discuss clear government budget management solutions. And Jim can, Jamie, I guess, can go over this briefly for tonight, but it's a budget tool that you're looking to implement and roll out among departments, including the Board of Ed, I assume?
No.
Pardon?
No.
Okay, so we can get started with Jim's brief overview of this concept.
Although I suppose if it worked well on a town side, you know, and the Board of Ed attending some of the same budget hearings, they may find a compelling need to mirror our approach, but that's probably putting the cart before the horse. But anyway, as it relates to this software, as Joe and I were talking about, we had a conversation earlier in the month, is that, you know, a lot of the budget forms we use, the process, you know, we're using Excel spreadsheets, which were Lotus spreadsheets that I brought over from when I was budget director in the city of Norwalk. And if you consider the fact that at the time they ran on a Windows 98 program using Excel when they came over, and that was 24 years ago. So as you might guess, enterprising folks have come up with different budget software management. Recently, we did something on a much smaller scale for our debt, the debt books that you approved for $6,500 about a year ago. And what this does is it integrates everything in the cloud. And so one of the challenges we have in finance is not everybody uses our forms, which you've seen in the budget books. And so we want to have some uniformity, and we want people to be able to use the system at the same time, whereas our budget stuff now is kind of static. So either, you know, lots of times I'm in it, and Catherine says, can you get out of it? I need to go in it. And she'll go to lunch. I'll go in her office and knock her out of it so I can use it. And, you know, those, and again, that's the nature of Excel and how that's done. It's still done in a lot of Connecticut communities, but what a number of my colleagues have been looking at this product, and we looked at a demo just on a capital budget side. And, you know, Jamie said to me, well, why, that looks pretty good. Why aren't you doing it on the operating side? I said, well, you know how this place is, incremental change. I'd start with the capital, then get department heads used to it, and put it in an operating side. He goes, no. He goes, you're going to do it, just do it once, you know. And he says, I'll send a letter out and tell them that this is what they're going to do. So that's pretty much, I said, well, that works. I said, you know, and so that's what we're looking at. The other thing is it actually improves the presentations. And again, it's the reason I'm letting the Board of Finance know is two reasons. Is one that you know, we'll be seeking an appropriation, which, you know, wasn't necessarily planned for. We want to try to implement a good part of it in next year's budget process, and it's going to change the look of what you guys receive. And for the first year, we may have to kind of work a little bit with both of them. We're going to, you know, I can't predict exactly how it's going to look because it would be a work in progress. And the other thing that you know, you guys may find or you might question over the time is, you know, lots of times we get stuff then added to us. You know, I was like, okay, that's why you see, okay, page 37D, you know, which is between, you know, C and E, you know, and stuff like that. And so we're trying to kind of standardize it across all aspects so that it has a similar look. Also, it provides an opportunity for a little bit more narrative. You know, when you look at the budget book, it's you know, it's pretty much you know, it's pretty much numbers. I mean, it's we adopt a line item budget. It's everything's here, but you know, this is a better way to kind of communicate, and it kind of takes into account, like the capital here is a separate file. You know, we have to link those, and so a lot of this stuff is it's going to give you a better look and feel, I think, than what you're used to, and I think it's going to produce ultimately an electronic budget that we can put on out there for our citizens. But you know, there's a cost for this, so you know, it's I believe it was about $37,000 for the whole suite. It would be prorated. Some folks are using ARPA dollars for this, you know, and some are basically, Pam, to your point about when it could be expended, some communities are like, well, I'll just you know, get the 3-year discount and use ARPA dollars, and now my dollars are expended. But you probably saw in about the third paragraph of that ARPA letter is that one of the things we try to avoid is with our ARPA dollars is to have these little cliffs, right? So we try to basically have glide paths if it's something we're going to continue to do. If it's something we're only going to do once, then that's what we do. Or we're going to double our paving. We don't get killed when it goes away. So that didn't seem consistent with that, but I'm still wrestling with that thought about using ARPA. But basically, I'm probably rambling a little bit. It's late, but my point was that we're looking at a new software. It provides a much more visually attractive picture. It could provide you more useful information to you, RTM, and the public. And you know, it's quite a departure from our spreadsheet world that we've been using for the last 25 years. So.
Thanks, Jim. So more to come on this?
Yeah.
You'll actually come up with a request probably at the next meeting?
Yeah, I could come up with a request. We've been toying whether the board may want to see a demo. I know this room's kind of awkward sometimes with the whole setup, but we might.
You get sent out in advance too, or something?
Yeah, I mean, we may be able to get somebody to come here too in the fall, so.
All right, so, but you're looking to implement this into the next budget cycle?
Correct.
So there'll be training for us as well as the RTM as well as others and the department heads?
Department heads definitely. In terms of you guys, I'm going to hold off on that one because it might be because you're not typically entering numbers, but if it's a, let me just see how if it's a pretty straightforward browser, I mean, we could certainly figure it out. But
and so we wouldn't be losing data, we'd be gaining.
Yeah, you wouldn't be losing anything, and you may get to a point where okay, don't fall off the chairs, where you might actually all have iPads at one point, in addition to whatever books you have, and you could kind of, you know, I mean, you know.
Do you think that it's you can buy it off the shelf and it's got what you need, or is it going to need customizations and things like that?
I think it looks pretty powerful. There's some large communities that use this nationally that are, you know, have budget offices that are certainly more robust than we are, and they're using it. So I'm not thinking we have to customize it too much. I mean, there may be some elements of it. One of the things that we're really curious to see, and other towns have done this, is how does it integrate with our enterprise system? How does it enterprise with our Munis system? And Munis is in a lot of communities, and so it's kind of tied with this. So.
Okay, more to come.
Yep.
More to come on this. Charlie?
Have you heard the term dashboard presentation? That's what this reminds me of.
Well, I mean, I think it probably has elements of that. I mean, I'm not sure I could define the term as well as maybe sustainability tonight, but I mean, I think I could but it does have sort of that feel, you know, just like you talk about, like our debt program that we used is a dashboard-based type thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a fair representation of it from my limited understanding of dashboard products. So,
with the detail.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, other questions or on this? Thanks, Jim, for that overview. Anything else, Jamie, we need to cover tonight? I think we're good. So, with no other business to come before the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Victor.
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.